Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this sunny evening. What we will try and do today is make sure we are all wrapped up ahead of 8 o'clock to give everybody a chance to get out onto their doorsteps and say thank you to all of our key workers and NHS staff that have been working tremendously hard during this pandemic, risking their lives and making sure that we are all safe and have all the essentials that we need. Before I progress any further, what I would like to do is introduce our amazing panel. We are expecting Lucy Allen, MP for Telford, to join us and hope that she is able to shortly. But in the meantime, I'm sure you will not be disappointed to hear that we have Baroness Nicky Morgan and Alex Stafford. So Alex is the first non-Labour MP in the 101-year history of the constituency of Rother Valley, and of course everyone will know Baroness Nicky Morgan for her very long career in the Conservative Party, working very hard as an MP, but now in the House of Lords. Thank you both and welcome. What I'd like to ask you both to do is just initially to share your thoughts on how we rebuild our economy after this pandemic. It's a really hot topic for everybody, whether it's about how we get people back into work, whether it's about what happens with all of this money that we've been handing out to support people during this really difficult time. How do we rebalance our books following this pandemic? Nicky, maybe I could start with you, if I could ask you to share your thoughts, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to be here this evening to join you all. I mean, what an extraordinary few weeks. And in fact, it's not really a few weeks now. It's quite a long time that we've been in this situation. And, you know, I mean, those of us who were in the House watching Rishi Sunak give his budget in March, I mean, what a changed economic landscape we confront. I think the first thing to say is that we should just give it a bit of time to see what happens when the lockdown is eased. I think different forecasters are saying, I think the Bank of England is perhaps slightly more optimistic than the Office of Budget Responsibility, and that's slightly more optimistic than the internal Treasury numbers or some of the city economist numbers that we're seeing. I think it's really difficult. A lot of this crisis has been, of course, health related, and then having a knock-on effect on business because of lockdown, but it's also psychologically related. And if you talk to friends and family on Zoom, because obviously until now we haven't really been able to see them unless they're in your household, it's really difficult to tell how quickly people are going to get back to something approaching normal spending habits. What's happened to household incomes? For people to be able to carry on working from home, then they probably carried on earning. People who've been furloughed, then they've earned at least 80% of their salaries. And of course, some bosses have topped that up. People are self-employed, there have been support schemes there. And I don't know about you, but I think we would certainly say as a household, although the Amazon man is a very regular visitor to our household, we have inevitably spent less money over the last 8 weeks than we normally would. And what's going to happen to that money that people have saved? Now, of course, if they're worried about their jobs, they are going to be keeping that. And I think that the expectation is that people have paid down their credit cards, they've built up some savings. But of course, if people feel a little more confident, and if we are able to encourage them out, I think part of it is going to be what's going to happen to retail and our high streets. Will people go out? So I'm sitting here in Leicestershire. We had today the first food market in the town, which hasn't happened for 8 weeks. And actually it was pretty busy. People socially distancing, but people were out spending money. Shops are obviously going to be open, non-essential retail, from the 15th of June. So I suppose my first thing is I hope the Treasury is going to just take time to see what's going to happen. I think Rishi will make it clear that he'll do whatever is needed to build up confidence. I think as Conservatives, of course, and after 10 years of some pretty difficult financial decisions, it's quite disheartening to see the national debt going up in the way that it has. But of course, there is a very good reason for that. And I think, again, we are in a very different position from where we were 10 years ago. Interest rates being what they are, we're able to borrow at, obviously we will owe some money and have the interest to pay on that, but actually borrowing costs are much, much cheaper than they were. And whilst as Conservatives, we don't want there to be a huge amount of debt around the country's neck or around the next generation's neck, I also think we need to take our time probably to pay this particular debt off. And it's been suggested by the IFS that we think about this a bit like the Second World War debt, where actually you build, you pay it off over a period of time. People still want to buy UK government debt, they still want to lend the UK government money, and we know the Bank of England stand behind. And then in terms of supporting businesses, I think again we'll need to see, I actually think there's going to have to be more sector by sector help, not picking winners, but as a former culture secretary, you'd expect me to say that obviously our heritage, our arts, our culture sector, our sports sector are incredibly important to the richness of our life. And they're things that we're known for as a UK around the world. It's inevitable that some of our big venues, any venues, are not going to be able to open for months to come. And so I personally would have no issue, in fact, if I were Oliver Dowden, I'm sure he is, making the case for Treasury support for specific sectors and venues that can't open. But those that can and do so socially distanced, professional services firms where people can carry on working from home, then I think we need to encourage people to be doing that as quickly as possible. Just, the final thing I'd just say is I think we're going to see, well, two things. One is, I think supply chains, businesses will be examining their supply chains, and particularly we know the relationship with China is going to be examined. We know that there are obviously MPs and others in the party who want us to think about our relationship with China again. I think there'll be onshoring of our more onshoring of our manufacturing capability, for example. But the second thing, the most powerful thing, and it'd be really interesting to hear from Alex on this, as one of our MPs successful in the seat we haven't held forever, is about the levelling up agenda. And I think that was a huge part of the reason that we won in December. I think actually it's a secret in which we can reach out to areas of the country who have felt for many years ignored, but particularly after this crisis, who need their confidence built. So I think the levelling up agenda provides us a really good example and a way in to supporting those communities. So it's been very difficult. We're in a very unprecedented place, after the hard work of paying off the national debt. But equally, I think there are opportunities out there and at the end of the day, Conservatives understand business. We're there on business's side. I'm absolutely certain we can rebuild.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Alex, can I ask you to share your thoughts, please?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for having me. And obviously it's a privilege, as Nikki said, to be the first ever Conservative MP for Rother Valley. The heart of the miners' strike, the Battle of Orgreaves, happens here in my seat. And now it's Conservative with 6,000 majority. So this is not what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss the economy. The first thing I want to say is the economy is in a bad state. It's in a very bad state. The amount of borrowing we've done is huge. I mean, it was the right thing to do, clearly, and interest rates are low. We need to save the jobs, and it's the furloughing scheme and the other schemes have saved millions of jobs. But they've saved millions of jobs for now, and I don't think we know where it's going to take us at the end of the crisis. We can't continue spending this money. So I think the level of spending and borrowing is going to be World War II levels. It is that sort of money we are going to have to deal with. And let's make no bones about it. After the Second World War, this country was bankrupt, was genuinely bankrupt. I'm not saying we're going to be bankrupt, but it's going to be tough. And I think Nikki did touch on some interesting points. She was there as an MP during austerity. And I know a lot of my colleagues who went through that, they thought it was a tough time getting the legislation. The austerity, the decision made were tough. And I think this is frankly going to be worse than austerity when it comes to the impact. I don't know how we're going to deal with it. So they make some tough decisions. And now these decisions are very different to what we came into Parliament 5 months ago, as Nikki said again. When we came into Parliament about the levelling up, there's almost not a blank check, but the first couple of days in, all of us new Northern MPs were taken to number 11 and said, what do you want? Write us a list of what you want. We can't promise everything, but we're going to try over the next 4 years to make basically your dreams come true. And that was the attitude. And we were having these meetings, and then almost overnight, it came to a screeching stop. I remember just having... just before the budget, they arranged a series of meetings in number 11 to discuss spending, what you'd want, what you'd lobbied for, what the outcomes of that. So we all came in there with our spending ads. And even then they said, well, we're going to have to save money because we think this COVID thing is going to be bad. They didn't realize how bad it was. And frankly, I and most of my other MPs didn't appreciate how bad it was only a few weeks before the budget. So I think we are in a very different world. But on that thing, I think there's an element of hope. Although people did vote, us in the north, for levelling up, I think there's a lot more to levelling up than spending and big capital spending. And for instance, I never got elected promising a new airport or a new hospice or anything like that. And most of my colleagues didn't. I know some did, but most didn't though. It was more about being neglected and left behind. And Brexit was just one example of decades of the North being ignored, both by Labour and also the Conservatives. We'd also ignored large swathes of the North, let's be honest about it. Partly because we haven't got any representatives there, but now we do. There's a focus on that. But when it comes to the economic impacts of COVID, I think first of all there is obviously the furloughing scheme and and all the borrowing doing to get through this. Secondly, there's the impact, as Nikki referred to, of what is going to be sort of basic consumer spending, our appetite when we come out of this. How are people's attitudes going to change? And thirdly, and I think there's a big issue, which I don't think many people are talking about, is the impact this has on the psyche of businesses. And by that I mean you've had lots of businesses now who frankly have had to make huge changes to work remotely, to keep working, invested in technology to work remotely, with Zoom, laptop stuff, made a huge outlay to get their businesses to keep going. Are we honestly saying that as soon as it's over, they are going to go back to the normal ways of working? I think it's very unlikely. So that means there's fewer people need an office, which means, especially London, down in the south, has a huge amount of office space. We won't need so many office spaces. And suddenly we're going to have basically empty buildings rattling around the capital. People won't be maintaining them, people won't be building them, people won't be cleaning, cooking for them. Suddenly there's huge swathes of the workforce, frankly, won't need, because if everyone's working from home, that means they don't need so much office space and stuff, which means suddenly a lot of those businesses that rely on office fit outs how are they going to survive? Also on that, a lot of companies have furloughed people. And I'm hearing that a lot of companies are doing okay at the moment with staff furloughed. They're doing quite well. And are we going to tell me that, when they have stopped paying for the furlough, are these businesses, well, actually, we got by quite okay with these furloughed? Are these people really needed? And unfortunately, there's going to be some tough choices for companies in a very ruthless way, looking at, well, X and Y was furloughed. We still did their function because we gave a slightly more work to somebody else. Do we need these people? And suddenly we're going to have a lot of people who frankly haven't been doing any work for the last few months. And when they come back, their bosses think they can survive without them. So I think there's going to be that huge impact on business as well. So it's those three ways that the economy, frankly, is going to be in dire straits. I think one sort of silver bullet, one like this, is the whole world has gone down the tubes, frankly. Everyone's economy has been hit. So it's all relative. So everyone's going down, then sort of relatively well there. And as I said, we're still making stuff, making good products, we're selling good services. We are still going to export that. So there is that chance, but it's trying to rebalance our economy at the end of it. Now, one thing that I'm passionate about, one area that frankly needs to be rebalanced is large areas in the north, like my seat. I alluded to the fact that half the miners' strike. We had huge mines, collieries closed down, steelworks closed down nearby, and there's still a huge, relatively skilled, relatively unemployed workforce ready to go. Now, what we need to do, and one which ties into COVID and also the levelling up agenda, is trying to reskill these talented people, these very skilled people, to actually produce, make something which is frankly is world leading. And to me, one of the things where frankly the world is going is to a sort of a low carbon and net zero future. And I think this is almost a perfect opportunity for UK PLC to get on the front foot when it comes to new technologies, renewable, whether it's green finance, to actually retool our economy to this green future. Because let's be honest, the world is going to go net zero. It might not be for 20, 30 years. Some countries will do it next 10 years, maybe it'll start even less. But if we can be on the front foot with the technology and skills, we're going to have a huge ability to export some great technologies and great skill sets, which the whole world will be needing. And that's the way the world is going. So if you can get on the front foot, invest in those type of renewable, green, and I don't just mean wind turbines. I mean how you do finance, how you just do procurement. Everything can be done with that net zero lens. And if we make ourselves experts at that, we can really push our economy forward and actually get the first mover advantage for UK PLC. And I think that is something which this crisis should push us forward. There's an opportunity which the world's going to, which we should jump on. So that's where I think we should go.
Thank you both. I mean, you've both raised some really different ideas there in terms of what we need to be considering as we move forward. Of course, you touched on how businesses are behaving. Today, we did see the Institute of Directors release some research that indicated that once we remove that government support for people on furlough, that's not necessarily going to be picked up by business, but also quite rightly recognise that we're very good at reimagining new jobs, and that's probably a huge part of our growth. From your point of view, how confident are you that transition from the loss of jobs that we're likely to see when we reduce furlough support, and those new jobs hit? What do you think there'll be a gap, and how long do you think that will last?
I think there'll inevitably be some sort of gap, lag time, when people realise what's going on. So actually, I don't think the public or business has realised the level of debt we've got ourselves into. I think, it's right to get this debt at the moment. But if you just look at the stock market, I mean, the stock market has gone down, but it's not completely collapsed. When you look at the percentage rise, it's still relatively buoyant, actually, over the last, it's gone down basically a couple of years worth of losses, but that's, in the grand scheme of things, that isn't huge. I don't think the economic impact has been priced in. And that, I think, partly is because of the great government support we've been giving people with businesses, with jobs, to keep things going. But when that support is reduced, removed, and it has to be reduced and removed, we have to do that eventually, then that's the impact. And I think there will be a lag. I think in the short term, things are going to be a bit dicey. Economically, things will be dicey in the short term. I'm confident in the medium, definitely long term, will boom. But in the short term, there's going to be huge impacts. And we've got to be realistic with people and set expectations. It's not going to be all clover going forward.
I think it's right. I mean, I think Alex is right. There will be a gap, and I think this is where the government, the sort of the next phase of the economic support package comes in, really. As to, I mean, originally we started off, I think, just thinking it's a bridge from one side of lockdown to another side of lockdown. Everything would go back to how it was. Now, exactly as you say, things are changed quite fundamentally, and there will be some businesses, and particularly some retailers, we just don't see reopen. And we know that a couple have already gone into administration in the course of this crisis, and they probably were going that way anyway. And there are some sectors like travel that are going to be very heavily affected. I mean, one of the things that we haven't seen since the general election is what, in any event, was what's happening to the industrial strategy. So, I mean, Alex's point about, low carbon future, but there are other technologies where we do very well as a country. So, pharma and bioscience being another one, for example. And actually, what we need, I think, is a vision from the Treasury now about those particular sectors. And we may come on to some questions, but I think one of the other things is we have a whole cohort of young people graduating from university this summer. And many of those graduate jobs have been potentially either withdrawn or put on hold. Again, it's about being inventive. The government, a lot of companies are sitting on huge amounts of apprenticeship levy they haven't used. Is it possible to recast that levy as a way of giving young people that experience, but somebody else is paying those salaries? Now, look, as a Conservative, a bit like the furlough scheme, it's not a particularly comfortable place to be, but actually is the right thing to do, given the kind of shock that we have had, which is not a normal economic shock.
Absolutely. Sorry, Alex.
So I just want to touch on something Nikki said about the skills, and I completely agree, and that's something which I haven't considered. And let's be honest, schools haven't been teaching. I don't care what people say. If you look at latest stats from The Economist, only, I think it was 6% in the state sector, 6% of secondary schools were getting basically a good education at the moment. Only 3% of primary schools. It's higher in the private sector, but the state sector, basically, no one's getting taught effectively. Let's be honest about it. Likewise, universities, they've shut up shop as well, and they're not being affected. So not only are we having the huge economic crisis, we're having people who are going to leave school or leave university, basically who have missed a huge chunk of their education, who are not going to be nearly as skilled, frankly, as those people that came before them. So they will be at a double disadvantage, which I don't think we've properly addressed. We need to get these people back up to the level of their peers. We're hamstringing them to go into a job market which is going to be perilous anyway.
And I think that's a really real fear that's going to have a long-term impact, because that there will be 10 years down the line, oh, you're that cohort that didn't get educated properly, and that stigma will remain. That's definitely a real concern for a lot of the young people I'm talking to. What do we do about preventing what looks like an inevitable youth unemployment crisis? How do we resolve that?
Well, I think it is about being, I mean, again, look, I think the reason this crisis and the economic response is perhaps less comfortable, but I think we are more capable of doing it as Conservatives, is because we are able to work with business. I think it has to be on both sides in a way that I think everyone has expected the whole country to step up, and businesses have as well. So our financiers have, in terms of getting the loans out the door and everything else. I think business is going to have to, in terms of encouragement. They will need that support in order to give those jobs, take those people on, but maybe accept that actually there are other ways of paying them. While businesses get back on their feet. And there are some businesses that are big enough to carry on taking on their cohorts, whether it's of summer interns or whether it's of graduates. People are definitely doing that. So, and I think inevitably the generation will be worried. All I would say is that in the grand sweep of things, actually, there are various, I graduated into a recession in the early 1990s, and you think there's no jobs around. Actually, it does right itself, and it is difficult. But I think given the sort of crisis we've been through, the unusual, nature of it, the fact it's a health-related crisis, I hope, and I think this is incumbent on the government to put the pressure on, and organisations, like the IOD, CBI and others, to say to businesses, you need to step up to the plate now and look after these people as well.
And they're definitely, I mean, going back onto people's spending habits, there definitely seems to be an appetite to want to support small businesses and local businesses. Do you think that the small business community, or and more localized and regionalized jobs, as opposed to London jobs or big city jobs, that's the future? Do you think that they are going to be job creators, where perhaps bigger corporates, more sluggish companies that were already in decline are going to fail us in that progress?
Alex?
Yeah, I think they're a good way of addressing things, but we've got to be realistic about the UK economy. We are the fifth largest economy in the world. We're a powerhouse. And yes, smaller businesses are the lifeblood of it, but you also need to export goods and services. That is vital. And I mean, one local example, a local cheese shop near me, they've had their footfall through the roof since the crisis. Everyone's buying local, and it's great. Yet overnight, they lost 60% of their business because they used to cater for events. So frankly, they can double their footfall, more than double their footfall at the shop. But if they're not having the big events that had the big spenders, then there's an issue. So what we want basically is big business, for want of a word, big organizations, them to spell out small businesses and locally that way. That is how we can really drive it forward. I think as we are a nation of shopkeepers, so I'm very confident that frankly we will find a way of making money, and good money, across a whole range of things. I bet in 10 years time, the conversation, there's a small business out there today that we wouldn't even think about making something you probably never even heard of, which would be a multi-billion-pound business in the UK. I'm sure of it, and that will be the next big thing. But we can't even comprehend what it is yet, and I don't think we can say what it is yet. So it is vital that we give that support for small businesses, because we don't know where the next big thing is going to come from. We don't know where the next bit of ingenuity is coming from. So yeah, we need government to work with businesses. I think, as Nikki said, we have to work hand in hand. We have to work with apprentices. I too graduated during the 2008 recession, so I know also the impact of it. However, I also know realistically the lifestyle of many of my peers was a lot different. The lifestyle of people who graduated 2-3 years before. 2-3 years before I graduated, all the big companies, the big four, the banks were just constantly trawling universities, desperate for people. That's switched off overnight, literally overnight. And I'm not asking for violins here, but the people who graduated often sort of from a similar degree, similar university, even a few years before me, if you look at their average income now, it's very different from my cohort. So things do have an impact.
And Alex, I totally sympathise. I was a 2008 cohort as well, so it was painful. So I'm just going to go to an audience question. So this is from Cecilia. It's a great time to push green technology, which is something that Alex, you touched on. How much of a priority is this in our current government?
It's a huge priority, and I think without feeling confidences, it's probably the biggest conversation prior to COVID people were having. Brexit was basically the party was on the side of Brexit, that was happening. And then with COP26, was going to be the end of this year, the Conservative Network, in my view, is probably at the moment the most successful group in Parliament when it comes to Conservative MPs. Huge traction. Even just look at the Prime Minister. His father is a big environmentalist. His partner is a big, animal person. He is surrounded by people who care about the economy, the environment, green things. So actually, it was getting a lot of traction. So I'd say it was big, and I hope that COVID hasn't knocked that off course. But I have seen no reason why it would be.
I would agree entirely with that. And I don't think it has to. I think what we need to think about is how do we give people ways of living in a low carbon way. So, for example, outside London, I suspect there are going to be more people driving, which ordinarily we would, not want to encourage. More roads, more pollution. Actually, I think more people are now interested in buying electric vehicles, So, how easy is it to do that? What incentives do we give? What's the market like? Again, we don't want to get people hooked on incentives, but there are ways. In London, I suspect, and I haven't been in London since March, but talking to those who have, more cycling, more walking, again, are we able to make it easy for people to just carry on with those behaviours rather than to go back to what, how they were doing in the past? One of my great joys this week was discovering that the Costa drive-through near me had opened, but I did feel enormously guilty that they're now not using reusable cups because, of course, for obvious reasons. We were making good progress in changing behaviours, little things like that, little steps. We have proven, for example, how lovely it is not to have the sky filled with aircraft, which is one of our great polluters. If supply chains are going to change, if the travel industry is going to change, what is that going to mean, for example, for the airline industry and investment in new, even more environmentally friendly aircraft? Those are the sorts of things that I can see changing and questions being asked. And as Alex says, I think it's incumbent on all of us in Parliament and outside to work with campaigners to make sure those questions carry on being asked, and the government does. I think they want to act on it, but they are encouraged to do so.
And I'm just going to another question, just sort of staying on that vein there. We've got somebody asking about rebalancing our economy. So Amarine, on rebalancing our economy, will we look at carbon taxing or look at other options? And will we be able to invest in renewables? I'm sensing an overwhelming yes from both of you here.
My answer would be yes. I mean, Alex, I know you're on the Bays committee, so you may maybe look at this. I think the idea about carbon taxing, I suspect, is something we probably don't want to pursue. I mean, tax to change behaviours doesn't ultimately change behaviours. So it might nudge industries, it might get them to invest in new, more environmentally friendly technologies. It doesn't solve the ultimate problem of changing the way we all live our lives, and that's what's got to happen. Yes, in terms of renewables, I mean, I think if you look now at the stats of how our national energy is being generated, it is extraordinary, obviously, how we are reliant on renewables.
Yes, I completely concur with what Nikki said, and especially with the carbon tax, I think taxing your way or forcing people behaviour by taxation never really works. And the only way I believe we can get to sort of net zero, which is where we want to go, is by bringing people along with us. It's not by, and showing them the benefits. I do believe there are benefits to the average person in the street of low carbon and low technologies, whether it's air pollution, whether it's easier way, whether it's frankly, Tesla cars are frankly a lot cooler and a lot better than normal cars. It's stuff like that. That's how we get people to move along, not by sort of hitting them over the head and saying you're wrong and you're bad for doing the way things were. It's showing the positive. So I'm very much against that notion of carbon taxes. I don't think it works ultimately to change behaviour, and that's what we need to do.
We spoke earlier about borrowing being really, really high at the moment. We have a lot of debt. We need to pay it off. Do you think that this is going to be austerity 2.0, or do you think there's going to be a different strategy here?
No, I don't think it'll be austerity 2.0. I think we'd already politically moved on from that. I was there 10 years ago when we were making some tough decisions as new MPs, but they were the right decisions. And I think cutting public spending was, we did have to do it, and it was the right thing, but it was extremely difficult. And I was in the Treasury for a period of time when it took longer than we expected for things to start turning around. And I just don't think the austerity, I mean, the Prime Minister's been pretty clear about that. We are going to have to work out a way of bringing down that national debt. As I said at the beginning, it's going to be over a much longer period. And there may well be elements of public spending where the focus changes, for example, things we don't spend money on. But I think we won't be spending less necessarily, we'll be spending it in a different way. And the best thing we can do is to get the economy to grow. And that's why all the things we've been talking about are so important.
Yeah, I agree with that about austerity. I don't think anyone wants to. Let's be honest, I don't think the Prime Minister is necessarily an austerity-minded Prime Minister. He likes shiny new things. So we all like shiny new things. And us in the North, we basically promised lots of shiny new things. He likes HS2, unfortunately. So I don't see the natural implications to austerity. We've used a lot of political capital over the last decade with austerity. We needed to. And also, as we said, interest rates are so low at the moment that frankly now is a good time to borrow money. In some ways we're very lucky they came along when we did, because interest rates were so low. I just politically think it's very hard to do austerity. That doesn't mean there won't be tax rises. There won't be various cuts in certain aspects. But I don't think anyone really knows where that's going to come yet. But I can't see the political will there for being austerity 2.0.
Sort of, I think you've both mentioned that levelling up is hugely important, and it certainly has been a huge part of the narrative of this government and getting into number 10 as well. I think, me personally, I think growth comes when your whole country and all your nations come with you. Do you both share that sentiment? Is that something that's high up on the agenda for number 10?
Alex, go on. You've had the conversations probably more recently than I have.
About well, yes, frankly, it is incredibly important for number 10. I think seats like mine, one for the first time, many seats across the north, they want to keep them. Let's be honest. And let's be honest, I do honestly think this is a great thing for the country. For the first time for, I think, a long time, we have a national government. And I do honestly mean we have seats from Scotland to the north, the Midlands, down to the south. There is a strong conservative representative across the country now. I think that is a great thing. And let's be honest, we want to keep the seats. And looking at the numbers, there are so many seats we almost got. There are seats near me, like the seats near me, I Wentworth and Durham, we only lost by a couple of thousand. And we didn't do any work there. That wasn't a target. And we lost by a couple of thousand. And there's so many other seats like that. So I think actually they want not only to keep what we've got, but also increase what we've got. And I do honestly believe that for a vast way, if not all the seats we've won, these sort of northern seats, red wall seats, we can and we should be keeping them next time. Because I do think a lot is also down to culturally. And when we see levelling up, I don't think it's just about economically, it's about levelling up the mindset, saying to people in seats like this, like, your voice does matter. You're not stupid, you're not thick, you were not taken for granted, which frankly, a lot of these people have been told constantly by Labour who ruled them for a long time. And actually, you have a say, and it's our duty as Conservatives to show people like in my seat that actually, just because you voted Labour most of your life, your family did and your family's family did it, actually your views are far more in tune with the Conservatives. Family-orientated, patriotic, small government, small business, just wanted to help each other out. That's far more conservative than what Labour ever did. You just voted Labour because that's what people did. But now that dam has been broken, there's no reason not to do it again. And in fact, I honestly believe, like in my seat, I think more people will be voting Conservative next time. Because a lot of people in my seat, they voted the Brexit Party because they couldn't bring themselves to vote Conservative. But now that's happened, now it's easier. Now your friends, your family, and people are voting Conservative, you can easily move on. I think constantly I heard on the doorstep in the election was, this time I'm going to vote Conservative, first time ever, but there's no point knocking in this village, town, street, whatever, because you won't find a single other person voting Conservative. Again and again, a door after door, next to each other. At one point, I got a bit angry with someone and actually waved my canvas card at them and said, look, all your friends and family are doing it as well. And I think there's that mentality. And I think, honestly, if it has another general election the day after the previous one, we would have won more seats and we've got bigger majorities, because the sort of stigma, and there was a stigma, let's go say, a stigma as well, of voting Conservative has been broken. People said, oh, it's okay. We can vote Conservative. Other people are doing it as well. And that has been broken now. And it's very hard to actually roll that back when you realise. I look in Scotland, what happened to Labour in the last 5 years? People don't vote Labour anymore.
I think that's exactly right. Speaking of the Midlands, former Midlands MP and still living in the Midlands, I think we just need to, Alex is completely right that levelling up is not just about the economy. We need to think about some specific things about what it is about. Obviously, my previous job, two things. One was broadband, actually connectivity, and I think broadband has been proven to be, one of the critical utilities the last few weeks. Look, we're relying on everybody's broadband holding up to be able to do this call, for example, and that's been important. And the other thing is, actually, as Alex said, it's about place. And I think the further you get away from London, people are very proud of the places they're born, the places they represent, the places they live and they work. And I think sometimes in Whitehall, that's not always understood. And I was fighting a bit of a battle in DCMS to get us to think about policy on the basis of investing in places. And again, I think that's where MPs like Alex will be really powerful in saying to number 10 and to other departments, this is what we need, not just a new bridge or whatever, but actually a real investment in the heritage and culture of the place I represent. And people will, I believe, from my experience in Loughborough, people will appreciate that.
And I just want to sort of come back on that. I completely agree. It's one thing, you build a bridge, a few people are going to be happy. Are they going to care about that in 5 years' time? Generally, are they going to go out and say, unless it's you live next to the bridge and it's the most essential thing ever, you're not going to vote Conservative for the bridge. You're going to vote because are they on my side? Fundamentally, that's what is this party on my side? We may disagree, but on my side. And that, and you mentioned broadband, Nikki, and that I completely agree with. It's not so much an issue in my area. My seat got good broadband, but not just broadband, but also our relationship with China, which you also mentioned. Because obviously one of the big reasons behind 5G, I think the issue of 5G was Huawei, and we've seen, I think, a huge change of opinion in the Conservative Party. And it's worth noting that the Huawei issue now and the China issue, what China's done through the crisis has been monstered by all wings of the party, from the sort of traditional more ERG types who are frankly already very sceptical about Huawei, to the TRG. I know the TRG and groups in Parliament are now looking at our relationship with China. It's now unified the parliamentary party about what we do with China, because China has acted disgracefully during this crisis.
And we discussed China in the policy event that we ran 2 weeks ago, and there was definitely real passion behind how people felt about this, but equally there was a bit of a divide as well. So we've done some research, every couple of weeks, just to see how our members are feeling about things. And there were definitely concerns and definitely a desire to see more things being manufactured in this country. And I know, Nikki, you mentioned that you think there's going to be an increase of what we do within our own borders, to add a bit of sustainability, if anything else. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because we've sort of moved away from manufacturing in so many ways, and we've moved towards the service industry, and we've spoken quite at length about the change in what our job market's going to look like. Do you think automation is going to pick up on manufacturing, and it's going to create, it's not necessarily people on the conveyor belts within a factory working, but people operating the technology? Is that something that you envisage?
Yeah, yes, look, I think what's called the fourth industrial revolution, it's here. I think we do have a manufacturing base in this country, but it does tend to be high tech or advanced manufacturing, which is brilliant because it means you get a worldwide reputation for it. I do think the crisis means that we will bring back more, less advanced, but manufacturing. So because people will want their supply chain to be either closer to home, as in the UK, or they'll have a more diversified supply chain, so they're not just relying on China, for example, and stuff being made around the world. So I think automation, yes, but I don't think it's a threat to jobs. I think sometimes people think that's it, we'll bring in the robots and they'll replace people. Actually, what will happen, but it goes back to the point we were making about skills earlier on. You've got to upskill people as well to be able to cope with or to be able to be in the right place for the new jobs. So I think it's an exciting time, but again, it's one of those things where I think government and business have to work together to tell people that actually there will be new jobs in the future, not just that people's jobs are going to disappear. Because I think if we did that, we'd go back to causing the problems that I suspect Alex probably had a lot of people saying I can't vote, or I'm struggling to vote Tory because of what happened in the 1980s. And so what we actually must not do is go back to a situation where we look like we don't care about people's jobs and lifestyles changing.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and sorry, and Alex, I'll let you finish.
No, I was just saying, yeah, I mean, that thing, the jobs, the automation stuff, that I probably come off a bit negative in some ways about the economy, but I very much believe there's going to be more jobs. As we've always seen, every new technology comes along, people are always worried about their job, but actually we just create different jobs. Yeah. And that's why I use very carefully the words retooling. I mean, to retool people's skills. So there are going to be that job. There's going to be more jobs, frankly, if the economy works well, and it will work. We just need to make sure they have the right skills. But on that stuff that you said about, Nikki, about the impact of the 1980s, yes, huge impact. But then again, I've spoken to thousands of former miners in my constituency, and they've yet to meet a single miner who liked being a miner. It's a dirty, dangerous job. They like the sense of community. They like the wages. They like the pride in their work. They like all those aspects. But the actual physical digging dirty coal out in a dangerous environment, nobody liked. And I think Labour got it wrong by eulogising the actual physical mining rather than the communities. And if we replace the communities with jobs, which are valuable jobs, with well-paid, well-skilled, respected jobs, which I think we should do, then you can create that community again and help those communities. We shouldn't sort of fetishize the actual physical mining job, because that was a bad job. We want better jobs, but better communities.
Mm. And I'm just going to go to Julia's question here now. So she's asked, how do we find opportunities? Should we revisit local plans? And are our cities really, as our cities are really going to change?
I think this goes back to one of the great unknowns, which is what's going to happen to people's lifestyles. There's lots of talk about people who have lived in cities during the pandemic without their own outside space, or perhaps in close proximity to people, whether that's going to mean that people move further out, they're going to look for new opportunities. I think there will be an element of that. But I also take Alex's point earlier on about, office space changing. So we're going to have to convert some of that office space into living accommodation, provide more. London, for example, is very short of living accommodation. So I suspect it's a question of our cities will change. Local plans, yes, and I think we need local authorities to be in charge of their areas. But one of the great battles of the last 10 years has been about making sure that those houses get built. What are the barriers to them being built, and making sure that actually local authorities keep their local plans up to date. Because Alex and colleagues will find that planning is one of those issues that people feel incredibly strongly about in their communities, and the way to get to say neutralize it, the way to tackle it is for local authorities to take responsibility for actually planning for their area.
Yeah, I think local plans are incredibly important, but let's be honest, most local authorities ignore them. It's as simple as that. They are just ignored. They are not worth the paper they're written on in so many areas, which is a great shame. I think local plans are incredibly important. It really sets the tone of an area rather than sort of identikit towns, villages, whatever. We don't want that. Each of these areas, as you mentioned, Nikki, about place, each of these areas, even in my constituencies, are very different. The people who live in the village of Furbeck, for instance, which is quite a sort of a traditional chocolate box English country village, are very different from the former pit village of Orgreaves. They're completely different in the same constituency, and they have their own great ways of working. So you can't have one identikit type of plan. We need to put the communities and the wills and needs of the community at the heart of everything we do.
And we spoke a lot about the psychology of businesses. So we've spoken about there's going to be different kinds of jobs. People are going to work in different ways. What are your sort of primary concerns about the psyche of businesses, and how do we absolve those?
So I suppose there are two things I'm concerned about. Working from home is fantastic, but there are dangers in it. I mean, there are dangers as social beings. I think we all want to actually, one of the things we've missed hugely in the last few weeks is being social contact with people, that bumping into somebody when you're getting a coffee, and that's how you have a chat, and maybe an idea about a meeting, and that sparks and everything else. My worry is that particularly for women, there's the report out today from Citi, one of the big banks, saying that actually women are most at risk of losing their job as a result of the pandemic. And I worry also that, because of the childcare issues, because of all the school years not going back, that actually people could be working from home, but somehow bosses are going to have to think about how they're going to recognise the contribution of people who aren't or just don't want to be in an office full time. And the second group is, we although we can begin to see light at the end of the tunnel, we are still in the midst of a pandemic. We don't know what's going to happen about a second wave. There are some people who are medically unable to work, but go into an office, but perfectly capable of working elsewhere with some adaptations. And bosses, and it's a hard ask for bosses, and particularly bosses of smaller businesses, are going to have to think about how they're going to look after those employees. And I think that is going to be something that many companies that'll be a whole new thing for companies to think about. And sometimes people will not realise that they had an employee who had a condition, which means that they're not going to be able to come back to work in the same way.
Yeah, I think it's really about the different type of people who are working. I think, as we said, working remotely is great. But I do honestly think we work better together. And yes, technology has cut down some of those barriers, but there's nothing like having those sort of water cooler moments, the discussion moments. That's where ideas come from. And also, I was on call with another fellow MP of the party who were arguing on the either side of the remote parliament, and she was saying, it's great. I am working far more efficiently now. I'm doing 10 hours a day in front of my computer. That's not efficiently. That is job creep. If you're doing 10 hours a day in front of a computer, that's not healthy for anyone. That's not efficiency. That to me shows you're being inefficient. And I'm working far harder and longer hours now than I was in the office, but I'm not working any more efficiently. I'm still probably doing the same amount of work, obviously with COVID stuff, but it's less efficient. And that is the problem. Offices are designed initially to create efficiencies. It is a type of factory. It is a factory, and that creates efficiency, which is good. So I also very believe there should be a line between the public life and your private life. And when you close that door, yes, you can't always switch off, but you need your family, you need your friends, you need that time to relax. It's good for your physical health, but it's far better for your mental health. And that's a huge impact. So I worry that there'll be this expectation almost for people to always be on and always be available, rather than actually saying you do need that private life, you do need that downtime. And that to me is a worry, because at the moment, base bosses expect, because I've seen this, constituents message me, so they should be expecting a call the whole time, from getting up at sort of 7 in the morning to 10 at night. They should be on call, because why not? They've got the computer, they've got the screens there, they physically can work. And suddenly, unless you're very strict about it, a lot of unscrupulous bosses would take advantage of that, and that's going to have a huge impact on people.
How do we protect workers in those situations?
Well, I think it's frankly very hard, unless you put in laws about saying you cannot answer emails after a certain time or emails shut off and stuff. I just think it's very hard, because we've all been in those situations in the office where you're a new person, you want to impress, you want to show what you're doing, what you're doing, but unless you're sort of being forced to stop working, I think it's going to be it's impossible almost.
Yeah, I think you perhaps. There'll be some companies that are much better, and the sharing of best practice. And it's a difficult conversation, right? Alex is exactly right. If you're a junior person, it's incumbent on those who are senior to set the tone for these things. I think it is in France where there are some businesses. I think it's not law, but it's the business practices. You don't send an email between 5 p.m. on a Friday night and 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. It will be better for all if we I think we'd all be happier if we did that, and if our constituents did it too.
Yeah. I just want to thank you both, and I just want to invite you now to just share some sort of concluding. I'm just conscious of the time. I would love to go on longer. I think there's some really interesting points that I'd love to pick up on, but I want to give everyone a time to get out onto their doorsteps. Just invite you just to share some concluding thoughts. Alex, if we could start with you, please.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I think the clinical is we're going through some difficult times, but I do think that we will adapt, and we will actually, frankly, come out better and stronger. We always have in the past, we always in the future. So I think there's a lot of cause of optimism, but I think the next few months, next year or so, will be a bit tough.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, I think it is going to be tough, and I think we won the election and got great MPs like Alex elected, and thought that we knew what the next couple of years held, and then suddenly it all looks very different. But the Conservative Party wins and is successful, has been for many decades, because we are an incredibly adaptable party. And I would much rather have the Conservative government, Conservative Party in government now, being able to anticipate and work with business and put something in place that is genuinely going to rebuild and restart our economy, as opposed to accepting that government has all the answers. And I'd just like to say, it's been a difficult few days, I think, for all of us. But at the end of the day, we are also a team. And I think, credit to Conservative Progress and many other Conservative grassroots organisations who are organising these sorts of events, because it's really important that, we can't get together and go to the pub and everything else, that we're doing all of this. So thank you.
Thank you both so much for joining us, and thank you to everybody that was watching today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care.